this video, I'll be sharing a little bit more in detail, in depth, about how to prepare and run a retreat. So first, I'm gonna get into some of the problems that people face, and one big overarching new context that is the solution to that problem. And then I'll share some specific strategies for designing your retreat, monetizing it, planning out the content, and executing it. Before I get into all that, I want to share just a little bit about me and why I'm someone that you might want to listen to when it comes to retreats. I've been in business for 13 years. I have an MBA. I've worked with huge corporations and used to be a speaker at humongous events and did a lot of trainings and workshops. And about 6 years ago, I got burnt out and I shifted my entire business to doing what I loved to do most, which were small, intimate retreats. When I made that shift, I fully expected my income to get less and smaller and to have to be able to live with less. And to my surprise, not only did my income grow substantially, it also became much more stable, much more joyful, and much more profitable. So that's why I love to share with other people, because I remember what it was like to be hustling and bustling all the time and trying to make ends meet. And now with this model, which I'm going to share with you about today, really my whole life is more enjoyable, and I do work that I love to do with clients that get a lot of value out of it. In fact, I like to say that I make a much bigger impact now with much smaller events. So one of the biggest problems that people run into, and that I hear again and again when it comes to preparing and planning and running a retreat, is people get into debt, or they overspend, or they end up spending more than they make with a retreat. Now, this is usually because people tend to focus on the wrong thing when they're designing their retreats. A lot of times people decide, oh, I want to run a retreat, and then they immediately get into the conversation about where they're going to run it, what the travel is going to be like, and what kind of food they're going to offer, and all these fancy amenities. Here's the thing, a great retreat doesn't have to be fancy. Now, it can be, and there are ways to deliver a luxury experience without having to spend luxury prices. And another thing that gets in the way here, another thing that causes this problem, is that people commit to all of these expenses before they actually have anyone committed or paid to attend the retreat. So my big solution to this, before we get into all the other strategies, is what I call sell it first, figure it out later. I cannot emphasize this enough as a fantastic strategy to make sure that your events are profitable. To give you an example of how this looks in my business, and it might look different for you, is whenever I'm designing a new retreat or creating something new, I don't necessarily do all the production or planning up front. I get an idea of what I want to do. I decide what the outcome is, and we'll get deeper into this later, what the promise of that event is, of that retreat. And then I go and I pitch it. I sell it to people who I know are interested in working with me. I go to my inner circle of people and I offer it up to them. And if they want to do it, I take payment. Then I have money in hand, I have commitments, I have dates on the calendar, that's true. I already have dates and a city, but I don't have an exact location. But I have money in hand, and then I can use some of that money, or all of it, to start going and finding what I want to do, finding the venue, making a down payment or a deposit. But generally, I wait until I have enough money in hand that it justifies me going and doing this work. So sell it first, figure it out later is a great way to minimize your risk, especially if you're starting and doing one of these for the first time. So there are basically 3 buckets that I want to talk about here. There are probably a lot more buckets, but these are the ones that I came up with for this video. So the first bucket is your design of your retreat. Now, your design involves setting your dates and finding your location. Now, location doesn't necessarily mean venue. I mean just the city that you're gonna be in. That way you can sell it to people in case they have to travel in for your retreat. They know where they're traveling into, but you don't have to have the exact venue figured out just yet. But the dates are a really good thing to have too, because these are 2 things that you need in order to have someone commit to your retreat. The second part of this bucket of design is the content. And specifically, what is the content designed to achieve? What is that outcome that you're offering? That big promise that you're making to people? What are they going to have when they walk away? So you want to design at least the big arc of content. You don't have to design every single thing. And in fact, again, back to that sell it first, figure it out later piece, you just want enough to get people to commit. What are the outcomes they're going to get, rather than going too far into the nitty gritty. The next big piece of design is the pricing and the package. What are you going to charge for this retreat? Now, one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is undercharging for a retreat, especially if you are going to go all out and you are going to provide amenities and place to stay, accommodations. These are the kind of things that these add up in cost. You're going to need to charge more in order to cover those costs. And actually, what I recommend is not covering those costs. What I recommend is coming up with a juicy enough promise, a juicy enough outcome that people are going to get, that they will buy that outcome by itself and have the travel, accommodations, and everything else be separate from that. So in our retreat, just to give you an example, I've done this myself. I'm not recommending anything to you that I don't do myself. In our retreat, we charge for the business breakthrough program. We host it at a hotel in Miami. And basically the program is you show up and the experience itself, we cover everything. But we have lunch breaks and people go out to lunch. And except for one dinner as a group, we have open dinner so people go and do their dinners on their own. Think about it. When have you ever gone to a conference where they covered all of your meals and your hotel room? I get it. Sometimes they cover your meals, but not always. And definitely I've never been to a conference or a summit where they cover your hotel room too. Now I get it. A retreat, people think of it differently, but you can make a retreat that has open time for people to go off and have lunch and dinners on their own. Or you could provide them. Another piece of the design of this depends on what kind of retreat it is. If it's a wellness retreat, then you might want to feed people. You might actually want to gather everybody in a kitchen together and cook together. You might want to rent a VRBO or an Airbnb and host your retreat there so that you have the freedom to do whatever you want and you're not stuck getting hotel coffee and hotel food that's really expensive. So these are some of the things to think about in the design bucket. And there's one more key thing that I really want you to think about early on. And that's what comes next. What are you going to sell after the retreat? What are you going to offer to people to keep that transformation going? What is what I call the big back end? The big back end is where you can create a program and have a connection with people for a long time. And you can collect money for a long time too, which is great. You can create monthly recurring revenues for yourself, and you can create lasting transformation for your clients. The second bucket is marketing and sales. And like I said earlier, I'm a big believer in getting this thing to market and collecting cash for it early on before you start investing. So what that looks like in my world is that I have a private and meaningful conversation with every single person that I invite into my retreats. That's right. You will never find me trying to sell my retreat from a sales page with a button, click to sign up or register. And the reason for that is that with this model, more than almost any other model I can think of, it is so important. It is vital that you have the right people in the room. And if you let just any old person sign up for your retreat, you're stuck with any old person that signed up for your retreat. And that can be a big problem. I'm a big believer in hand selecting and curating your group so that you can have a really powerful outcome. A retreat is not an environment where you can have just anybody there. Just one bad apple in an event like this can really spoil the whole experience. And I found that a lot of times people don't realize that they're not a good fit. You're the one that's in charge of that. You are the leader. You cannot leave it up to them to decide if they belong there or not. It's up to you to decide, is this person an aligned fit for my event? So that's why I'm a big believer in having a meaningful conversation for enrollment. Now, I call these conversations sales as service conversations. And what that means is that whether or not someone ends up buying from me, they're going to get value from that conversation. So every piece of marketing that I do in the world, including the marketing that I do here, leads to a meaningful conversation with me directly. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be the same always. I'm not saying that I will be able to scale that forever. But for right now and for the last several years, it's worked really well for me to interview each and every person that comes into our events. Now, there was a small period in there, a couple years, where I had another person doing that for me. And while it felt pretty good to not have to do all those calls myself, quite honestly, the quality of the people that we were enrolling was not as good as the quality of the people that we're enrolling now that I'm doing the enrollments again. So what I advise in this bucket, marketing and sale, is putting yourself out there, doing all the marketing strategies. And by the way, I have lots of videos about how to market your retreat. So go up here and click on my playlist for marketing and selling and positioning yourself for selling retreats. I have plenty of videos on that. So I'm not going to dive deep into the marketing or the sales, but just to say that having all roads lead to a meaningful conversation where you hand enroll and hand pick people, that's what I recommend. And now that I've shared that with you, the one thing I will say that is so vitally important is get used to collecting payment on the phone. If you don't have the technology to do that yet, I think it is vitally important to get okay with, from a mindset perspective and also systematically from an operations perspective, be able to make an offer on the phone and collect payment on the spot. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with who say, oh, I got a sale for my retreat or 2 or 3, and I'm excited too until I find out they didn't collect payment. Now, I don't say anything right away because you never know, but to myself, I'm thinking, oh, that's not a real sale yet. Because until people invest, they are not fully committed. And it happens so often that people say yes, but then they don't follow through. So I'm a big believer in collecting payment when a person is most committed, when they're ready, and then collecting that payment right then and there basically starts the journey. One of the things I recommend too, which I almost forgot to share, is that when you collect payment, what you want is to be able to immediately deliver something of value. So if your retreat isn't till 2 or 3 months away, that's a long time for people to wait and remember why they invested in this. So you'll want to have something in between that keeps them engaged. I personally put together a Thinkific course that helps them get prepared for the retreat with certain videos and worksheets and fun stuff like that. The last bucket is the bucket of delivery. So this is the part where you are going to actually facilitate the experience. What does it take to get ready for that? Well, number one, you'll want to have a clear outline of what you're going to cover, of all the activities. And what I like to do is I create an outline that's organized by day and by segment. So I personally like to organize my days starting at 9 a.m., going till about 7 or 8 p.m., and blocks of 90 minutes with 30-minute breaks. Now, that might sound like long breaks, but what I found is that people need time to integrate the experience. So I've got, for my retreats, I do 3 days, and I've got these 90-minute blocks with 30-minute breaks in between, 90-minute lunch, which is a nice long lunch so people can really relax and get out, have lunch, and come back. And then I work with these segments. Now, in 3 days, that's 15 segments. That's 5 segments per day. So I always think in blocks of 5. Okay, day 1, day 2, day 3. So that's how I recommend organizing your retreat, setting it up as 3 separate days with 5 segments per day and not having the same type of content back to back. So every single day, I recommend having at least one physical activity or one thing that's movement-based or something that at least gets people out of their chairs if they're sitting down the whole time. Now, I don't know what kind of retreat you're running, so it kind of depends, but I'm a big believer in having different types of people come and breakout sessions and hot seats and basically do everything you can so that you're not just standing in front of a room talking for 3 days straight. And at the same time, don't over-engineer it. One of the biggest problems and one of the biggest challenges I've faced personally is I try to over-engineer it and figure everything out on paper and forget that part of the magic of a retreat lies in the unknown, lies in the people that I've just curated for this experience and trusting what comes up in the moment. I'll give you one example. I did a retreat a few years ago and I had organized the whole thing, laid the whole thing out. Every minute was accounted for in this retreat. And on the evening of the first day, so the end of the first day, we did a cooking competition and everybody was having fun. And at the dinner where everybody was partaking of what we had created, one of the women choked on a shrimp and almost died. It was one of the most traumatic experiences that I and many of us had ever witnessed. And because I was so focused on my plan, I tried to get us right back on track. When she wasn't dead, I figured, let's get back to work, right? Well, I almost missed an opportunity. I like to joke sometimes that there's my plan and then there's the universe's plan. Well, the universe had something else planned, and her choking was part of the universe's plan. Turns out instead of going on and kind of glossing over what had happened, one of the people that was very intuitive came up to me and said, you know what, Michelle, I don't think we need to get back to work just yet. I think it's really important that we process this experience. What do you think? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a really good point. Let's process this. Well, it turns out we ended up spending the next 3 days mostly processing this experience, and it ended up being one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever witnessed, and many of the women there too. What this woman who choked realized was that she had been basically selling herself out, selling out her life in favor of her business. She had been basically not home. She'd been having trouble with her husband, with her kids. And the realization was she needed to come back to her life. She needed to get present again with her life. And this near-death experience had her see it. And in her sharing that and in her realizing that, lots of other women in the room had the same realizations. It was a huge awakening that would never have happened if I had just stuck to the plan. So highly recommend planning and then also surrendering to what else is gonna just magically happen. If you enjoyed this video, then my guess is that you'll enjoy some of my other videos too. I highly recommend subscribing to my channel and also checking out my entire playlist about how to run retreats profitably and in a way that brings joy and fulfillment. Enjoy.